Greetings and salutations to our fine podcast audience. Welcome to 3 Ps in a Pod. It's episode 243.
We made it.
Are you guys up to a lot of brain work today?
What?
Are you ready to
We're having brain surgery?
Because we don't normally do this.
No.
We don't?
No.
Okay.
No, we don't.
We give very thoughtless answers.
Y'all don't know how
Hey,
hard
yeah.
I'm working then.
Very thoughtfully.
I can smell it over here.
I know.
Today's question is it's a tough one because
It ain't that tough for me.
well,
I'm going to say, I don't know.
you just proved my point.
I don't know.
Okay. Ed's going to say, I don't know, before the question's even asked. It's one of those difficult passages in the Bible.
Sure.
And apparently, whoever sent this question in, they've been reading their Bible. So, yay for you.
Good job.
Good job. You're reading it. You may not understand it all. That's okay. And you
Us
ask-
either.
That's right.
Mhm.
But you ask the questions, and we work these things out in community, and we'll do that right now, hopefully. We know a little bit, so we'll share with what we know. Here's the question, and some of you maybe just, after I ask the question, go, huh? Who?
Yes.
That's okay. What's the deal with Jesus being a priest in the order of Melchizedek?
I don't know.
I know. Ed don't know. So the rest of the question reads, I'm reading in Hebrews, and I don't understand the context of this order referenced from the Old Testament, having no beginning, no end. Was this priest a human?
I'm going to say no.
Well, you don't know that.
It's hard to know.
It's hard. Nobody knows.
I get it. That's why my first answer.
So you're just going to say no.
Reference
You're
back.
just going to start with no.
You're going to start with no. You
Well,
don't know that.
I don't see how you can have no beginning and no end and be human.
Well, now see.
Now, hold
that's
on
the
real
whole-
quick.
That's
not a reference to Melchizedek.
No.
That's a reference. That's a reference
priesthood.
to the order
of the priesthood.
I get that. I get that. But it's the order of Melchizedek. And what we know from the Bible, this is all we know from the Bible, there are two people in the order. There's not like
Well, it could
also,
have been an interruption in the order.
well,
Or a.
not for Jesus, because
Right.
Jesus we know has no beginning and no end.
Okay.
You know,
So let's
Clear the deck,
Let's
Nathan.
start. Let's
Start
start
here.
with who Melchizedek is.
nobody really knows.
Okay.
He's right. though.
No,
He's right.
nobody really
Let's start
knows.
with who Melchizedek is according to the story he's in the Bible.
Okay.
So,
we can at least. talk
In
about
Genesis, like
This
15 or something
mysterious guy that appears to Abraham.
like that.
it. Yeah, he does.
So he does.
He's
So
up here. He's in.
He wasn't known before, and all of a sudden he's there.
By Abraham.
So Abraham has a nephew named Lot, and Lot goes off and lives in a whole other place.
Yep.
And then that place gets invaded or something. We don't know. We just know that there's an army that comes
Yep.
and takes away Lot's people.
Yep.
And Abraham goes, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go slaughter all those people.
And he's going to attack him.
So I'm gonna raise up an army.
He does.
I'm gonna go and he goes and gets Lot back and he slaughters all those people. And then he goes to a place called Salem.
He sounds like a lot of leaders we have these days.
There you go.
I'm mad at people.
I've always
I'm gonna kill them.
I've always found it fascinating that Abraham, just this dude with a family, raised him up an army. And
Well-
did you just do that back then? That's pretty cool.
Well, what we know that this comes after he leaves Egypt and he gets a whole bunch of servants.
He
So
does.
most of his armies is him,
yeah.
his people, a whole bunch of other
I
people.
guarantee it's everybody that works for him. He's like, we're going to
We're
fight.
going to
They're
fight.
going. When you mean we, do you mean
Yeah.
we?
Yeah. So he goes out,
He goes.
he gets these people, and then he goes to a place called Salem. In Hebrews, it eventually gets
Shalem.
yes, it gets
That's true.
it is
Did
right.
you not
He's
know that,
right.
Ed?
I did know it, but tickles me you needed to say it.
I did.
Eventually, it gets called Jerusalem,
Jerusalem.
or Yarushalem.
Shalem.
That's eventually what it gets called.
This is more proof that the final answer is we don't know.
So the king of Salem,
Yes.
the king of Salem is a guy named Melchizedek, and
Who is also a priest.
who is also a priest, right? And so when Abraham comes to him, Abraham gives him a tenth or a tithe
Mhm.
of the
Everything he has.
everything he has of and what he got from these people
That's right.
that he gives it to Melchizedek, and this then we get picked up later in the book of Hebrews.
Hebrews 7.
Right, this is one of those exchanges when you read a lot of, because most of Genesis, once you get outside of the first 10, 11 chapters, which is like all of the beginning of humanity and such, When you get to Abraham, it's a bunch of weird little encounters like this, which is God's involved somehow.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be some blessing involved in this with him and Melchizedek, because most people, scholars who then point back to where does the idea of tithe begin, they point to this.
Mm-hmm.
They say this is Abraham does this,
Mhm.
so this is where the Israelites pick that whole thing up. So then we got to talk about the book of Hebrews, because that's where the two things get tied together.
Well,
That's the
and
story in the history of
That's the
Abraham.
story. But what the author of Hebrews is trying, this is the way I was taught in Bible college to understand it. There's this thing called types and shadows.
Mhm.
Right.
And
That's right.
And the idea behind it is there are things that the New Testament will do, and they'll grab people, events, images, objects even from the Old Testament, and they will bring them into the New Covenant, and they will say, now, this thing is like this other thing.
Right.
And here's how it's like this other thing. And they'll draw parallels between them, and they're used to highlight the new thing in the New
Mhm.
Covenant. That's what the author of Hebrews is doing. If you read the whole book of Hebrews, he's saying Jesus is better than all the other stuff
Correct.
in the Old Covenant. And he goes through, he's better than the priesthood. He's better than the sacrifices.
Better
He's
than
greater
angels,
he's
better
than the kings, all the things, because he's the greater of those things and the one that's going to last forever. So now what he's doing is he's showing that Jesus is our forever greatest priest,
like the mysterious guy.
like this mysterious guy who we don't know anything about other than he was over here worshiping the same God Abraham
Yes.
was, and nobody knows how that happened. He didn't have, as far as we know, because we don't know if he was human or not, he didn't have a beginning, and we don't know where he ended up.
That's right.
So in that way, Jesus is like him.
Well,
and it mirrors what
And then
Jesus
the guy
is.
in Hebrews says, I'd like to tell you more.
And I
He's
can't.
like the classic preacher that goes, but I'm running out of time.
Yes.
I don't have enough space to tell you everything. I've said everything I know. But
Well, and part of what he's doing here is the book of Hebrews, because there's a bunch of weirder stuff about angels at the beginning. The book of Hebrews is written to, one, it's hard for us to even know because no one knows who wrote it.
Nope.
No one really even knows who it was written to other than just Hebrews.
Yeah.
We know it was written to
a bunch
Hebrews.
of Jewish people.
I will say Scott McKnight thinks that Priscilla wrote it.
I know.
Yes. Yeah,
I think that's fascinating.
Well, I also think
Well, I will
Scott's
say-
got an axe to grind.
he does.
I will say this. When I was at OCC, that was the leading
Was it?
answer
Well,
on the thing was that it was Priscilla.
My professor, even in the 80s, believed it was written by, he didn't say Priscilla, but a female.
Yes.
Do they?
So
Well, that's awesome.
that was the answer I was supposed to put on the test.
Well,
was
I would
most
say
likely Priscilla.
from the college I went to, they could have never said that.
No, you can't have no
And
women
so-
writing the
and
Bible.
So basically, they just said, "Oh, we're gonna give it to Paul."
That's right.
That's what they did. They just said, "Oh, Paul."
It's
wrote
probably Paul.
It. It's probably.
I mean, just to be
Paul.
clear, my professor also was a guy who translated, part of the New Testament for the NIV, but he was Harvard trained.
So
So
We don't
he
trust
was-
him.
he
I'm
was
not
a-
sure he's a real Christian.
He was,
That's
a,
right.
he was a little suspect.
He's a little sus.
So
Okay.
part of
Although all of us are reading his translation.
what it seems most people think, unlike Paul's, which is one reason
Mhm.
I was really taught the least likely of all the answers is probably Paul.
Well, I believe that today.
Yes,
Now.
but I just say
Well, because it doesn't read like anything else
well,
Paul
because
wrote.
most likely it's a sermon.
Yes.
Most likely
It's a preacher.
It's a
Mhm.
it's not written to
That's
be.
why he says, I'd like to tell you more. But
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
we got to move on, y'all.
That's right.
Church is about to get out.
Yeah.
And most people think that he's probably writing to a group of Jewish Christians
Of course.
who have brought all of the in the time between Malachi, which is the last book of the Old Testament, and Jesus's life.
Mhm.
Right, it's about 400 years, and in that time, it's often called intertestamental between the Old and New
Yes.
Testament. There's a lot of like weird mysticism stuff that gets
Yeah.
brought up.
That's right.
People start worshiping angels.
Mhm.
Yeah.
People start, even this Melchizedek, because people start looking and go, what's the deal with that guy?
Mhm.
What's the deal with this? He's bringing all that in. And part of the issue that he's trying to address is, which is not a deal for us, which is, I think, an important thing for us to say here
That's
before I
right.
even get to what it is. The Bible is for us, but it is not written
To
to
us.
us. And we say that all the time, but this is important. This was a big deal to their audience. Jesus, he's trying to establish Jesus is prophet, priest, king,
Mhm.
which is why he says he's better than Moses, who was the prophet, right? He's better than the priesthood, and he's better than the king. But the problem for them was that Jesus was not from the tribe of Levi,
Yep.
which was the tribe of the prophet. He's from the tribe of Judah.
Mhm.
And so the reason he brings Melchizedek in is similar to the way that in Acts when Stephen is talking about, hey, God always worked outside the nation of Israel. Remember, Abraham wasn't part of the nation of Israel.
Yeah,
He
right.
began the whole thing. He wasn't circumcised. He then goes in and circumcised. He's doing the same thing here and saying, remember that guy Melchizedek you guys are all thinking? He was a priest of God, yet he wasn't even Jewish.
outside
That's right.
the Jewish nation.
That's
And so he's trying to, it's a little bit like often happens when we have to preach. Sometimes you have to imagine arguments that people may be thinking of, and you go, now, in case you're thinking this, let me say this.
Yeah.
He's doing a little bit of that when he talks about angels and Moses, is he's saying, God, as you've said, with these types and shadows, all that was happening with the nation of Israel, and he says this with the temple, is there's a truer, greater temple in heaven.
Yes.
That what happens here, when we worship here, man, it's being reflected, it's being mirrored here, right? And Jesus is this ultimate type that all these things are pointing to.
Yeah, that's right.
All the things you see in the Old Testament.
And-
So, anyway.
Ultimately, his point in Hebrews is don't leave Jesus behind.
That's
He's
right.
talking
Yes.
to a group of people who were thinking about maybe ditching Christianity and going back to just being
Jewish.
That's apparent. The whole book is
Yes.
about, he
Yeah.
gets to after this, you get to, don't forsake the assembly.
That's
you,
right.
You got to keep showing up so you can be encouraged and
Yeah.
spurred on to each other. Then he gives all the history in 11 of all the great heroes and how they persevered in
That's
their
right.
faith. And you need to make sure you lay everything aside so you can persevere.
That's right.
Yeah, and I would say it's confusing to us too. I mean, for the person
Oh,
who asked
yeah.
the question, and there's a lot of stuff out there. Trust me, you can find pretty much anything you want to online about this. I would suggest going to the Bible Project. They have
Yes.
a really good write-up about
Mhm.
this. They have a great video that talks a little bit about this. All you got to do is go to their site and search the keyword. Because you can go down really crazy rabbit
Yeah.
trails
Oh, yeah.
on this. Because I'll give you an example. When I was in that phase of my Bible study, Bible college life, and I was into some of this stuff, there's actually a theory out there that Melchizedek is Jesus,
Yeah, we talked about
Oh,
that.
yeah.
and that Jesus showed up in a supernatural way, and all of that kind of stuff. And there's really no hard evidence to prove that, but somebody just threw that out there. So you can hear all kinds of crazy stuff, like he wasn't human, like you said, that he just appeared like an angel of some type. And the Bible doesn't speak to all that.
No,
But the stuff that Nathan just said, that's the point that he's trying to make. And that's what's important, is get to what's the author trying to say, not necessarily. This is not one of those doctrines you have to believe to be a Christian. It's just
Well, and I don't even know there's much of a doctrine
not.
even around
There's
it.
not.
or anything other helpful to you other than Jesus is the whole deal.
yes,
Yes.
it's what it's trying to illustrate, not necessarily the thing and what is it.
And this is what I would say, kind of in getting to what do we take from all this is, as you said about not going down rabbit holes, this is the nature of anybody who is interested in the Bible in any way, shape, or form. And it's why it's important we put Jesus over the Bible, and we remember Jesus is who we worship, not the Bible is. People go down all kinds of rabbit holes. And the more interested, and I think what often happens is at the beginning, you're very I want to follow Jesus, so I don't want to know what's in the scriptures. And I would encourage you, read not just the life of Jesus, read the Bible, but don't feel like the point of the Bible is I understand every single thing that's in there. It's not the point of it. And to start going down rabbit holes on, people get on the Nephilim, and even I know people who, someone just recently asked me, are we going to go through all the things in Revelation at some point? I know y'all are preaching through the Bible, and everyone wants to get into little nuances on everything, and as if there's this secret knowledge about God that he made so hidden that only the most expert scholar could ever find it. That is not who Jesus is. Jesus is communicating always at the level that he goes, hey, I want you to know me. I want you to understand me. What the Bible is a library. It is a story that points to Jesus. And so there's a lot of value in stuff in the Old Testament. But I have to understand Jesus before I can understand anything that's going on back here. And this stuff is reference work. Even that story that we just told out of Genesis, it's a reference for something that's about Jesus.
Yep.
It's not just, oh, that's a cool story, and I'm glad I know that. It's, I want to understand who Jesus is and who.
Well, that's what you see really clearly in the New Testament is that, and it really threw me when I was studying the Bible and when I had become a Christian, really committed to understanding the Bible, and being taught by my professors, don't take the Bible out of context. Don't take the Bible out of context. And it became really clear to me the apostles were continually taking the Bible out of context. They did not quote verses in the context that they were originally written.
Right.
They take all the Bible to be about Jesus.
Yes.
And so they'll take Bible verses 600 years before that they've known since they were little boys and before they even knew about Jesus. And once Jesus shows up, they go, oh, that one phrase is about Jesus,
right.
even though clearly the prophet wasn't talking about Jesus. They interpret the whole light. So I say to people all the time, and this is a last 10, 15-year revelation of mine, people become Christians without the Bible.
Yes.
You do not put your faith in the Bible. Unlike other faith where people will say, hey, you want to understand Buddhism? You need to read this. Hey, you need to really get familiar with this way. This is the way of Islam. This is the way of this. And they think I can take a book and a book shows me the way of living under the reign of Jesus. No, Jesus shows you the way to live under. It is about Jesus. Everything in the book is about Jesus. And you can get so sidetracked into it. In fact, I have a person that's pretty close to me, meet with every week, who got really sidetracked on some YouTube videos about the priesthood of Noah. That there's again, I'm not saying go watch it because he went down a rabbit hole that almost threw him off the ship. There's a lot in there that you have to be really committed to Jesus. You must focus. Jesus is the Word of God. The Bible contains the words of God.
Yes. And I think it's really important. So I want to say this to the person who wrote this. I'm convinced that what I'm about to say you're already doing because most likely we are reading the book of Hebrews in a discipleship context. I bet you are also in that. Or maybe you just lucked out and you also just were reading there. So if you're not, here's what I'll say. I often now will say to people when you talk about, someone says, I want to get to know Jesus. My answer is not, okay, here's the Bible, go read the Bible. My answer is often now, okay, then you need to get around some believers of his who are living out his life in Christian community, centered around his spirit and, of course, informed by the Word of God and the teaching and the teachings in the Bible, all those things. It is not to exclude the Bible from the conversation. It is to say, in order for me to really get to know who Jesus is, the way he seemed to do it was to say, hey, I'm going to form communities of people who are centered on my teaching, centered on my spirit, centered on who I am. Now, here's the part of that that's rough. And this is where most people go, And I would say even people from our tradition of Christianity, which is really, I was just at a Christian ball game the other day, and the presentation of the gospel that was given.
Christian ball game?
It was a Christian organization around playing.
I didn't
You
know
know that they prayed at the beginning, had a devotion in the middle,
And
sang something in the middle, and probably also pledged allegiance to America.
The entire devotion, the presentation of the gospel in the middle of it was about Reformation Day and about sola scriptura. And that was the presentation of the gospel, was why we believe the Bible alone and all of these things. And I thought, and that's really, just to be clear, that is the Protestant stream of Christianity has become really just this. And this is not to discount the Bible. It's to put the Bible in its proper place. The way that Jesus seems to work is through communities of people who are centered on his spirit, centered on his teachings, which are found in the scriptures. And then the dangerous part of that, where people get kind of twisted, is what if that church messes things up? They will.
Oh, yeah.
They will. And the nature of it is God still, if those people, even when they mess it up, will be submissive to the Spirit, he works in those contexts. And I have found, I would probably argue most anybody who has experienced Jesus did so within the context of another believer. In the context of a Christian community that was imperfect and messed things up. And had that, there was...
Well, I would say this, if there's anybody who's been following Jesus for a long time and they told me they came to all the knowledge they have about Jesus only from the Bible and their own personal study, if they would sit down and write down what they believe, I bet it is goofy as all get out.
Probably.
Because it has to be shaped in community. And I also tell people, you need to spend some time with some believers, but you do need to know Jesus. And the best place we know to know Jesus is in the 4 books that talk about him and in the life of his community.
Yeah.
And so if you're
that's where he is.
That's right.
That's right.
Not by listening to all the arguments people have about different things in different
Well, and
parts.
they can.
Now, let's be clear. He is not in those words of the Bible.
No, that's right.
He didn't promise to. His spirit dwells in people.
That's right.
Yes.
That's
not
right.
in the pages or in the words of those
The
scriptures.
Bible is a tool that allows
Yes.
me. It is a space that I open up to say,
Yes.
I want to meet God through what he said.
And the Spirit will use that tool.
Oh, absolutely. But there is
But
a
it is
way
not the
he
same.
dwells within us
Mhm.
together.
Yes.
And they will help you not to get
Mhm.
sidetracked into these other things. And I love that you sent this in because this has been an interesting conversation. I hope it's been helpful. I hope it's just been interesting because I'll say this too. Just like ancient history probably don't do you any good, but you might listen to a podcast on ancient history. I'm not saying this question right here was the most uplifting and helpful thing, but what it may do is you're dwelling your mind still on, I want to think about Jesus and I want to think about that. And so even if this was just entertaining, but it happened to center your thoughts on Jesus for a minute, I hope that's a helpful part that we as a community can play in your development towards Jesus, because that's the purpose of the Bible. Is I would become a person who knows the story and I know the scriptures and I know the commands of Jesus enough that I know him. The goal is to know him. And the scriptures do open that up. And I have found that the less I spent saying, hey, the Bible is the deal, and the more I made Jesus the deal, the more I do love the Bible.
Oh,
And
yeah,
I love
absolutely.
to read the scriptures.
Absolutely.
And I love
time.
to enjoy that.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to put it in its proper place and to say, Jesus, the reason I love the Bible is the same reason I love the car I have right now that we just took on a trip with my family. It's not because I really like Kia Sedonas. It's because I really love my family.
Yeah.
And this has been a really helpful tool for me and my family to do some wonderful things together. And the next car I'll find a way. I don't love the car.
Yeah.
I love my family. And the car is a tool that helps me to.
That's always the best way to keep from turning other things outside of Jesus into idols. Is to first center Jesus.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time in my growing up years in a space where I can say this today, we idolized the Bible.
We centered the Bible.
Centered the Bible. It was everything. And we loved the Bible and got Jesus as a part of that system. But when I did what you just talked about, Ed, and I began to center Jesus,
Right.
the Bible just became it opened up things in it. And I did love it more than I did when I had it at the center.
It was a study before.
Oh yeah, it was so academic and
Yes.
it was hard and rigid and all that. But then Jesus broke all that up for me, and now it is in its proper place. And I read the Bible more now than I did then.
Right.
That's right.
It's
Same for me.
amazing.
Same
So
for me.
Yeah, I had the guy who first began to point me this direction in my late 20s, early 30s, got labeled a heretic in the movement we were in because he said the kind of stuff we're just now saying. And he didn't mean anything disregarded about the Bible. The illustration he first used that got my attention was, he just did a whole message on the thing where Jesus said to the Pharisees, you search the scriptures all point to me. And he said, our movement, our situation is we drive on the interstate and see a sign that says Jesus, and we think we saw Jesus by seeing the sign. He said, we have to get off the sign and go look at Jesus. And people are like, oh my gosh, he doesn't think the Bible. He wasn't saying that.
No.
The Bible was pointing where you needed to go.
Thank God for the Bible, because it is where I've learned to encounter Jesus.
Yes.
But it is not the same thing.
That's right.
Well, and it does help us to recognize his voice and to understand his will and understand who he is, but it's not the same. It's the difference between knowing somebody and knowing about somebody.
But because my relationship with Jesus, it happens in the times when I am in community with his body, when I'm in the place of prayer and he and I are talking and I'm listening to him, and he is guiding me and communing with me. and me with him. That's where my relationship with Jesus is. The Bible supports that.
That's right.
It does not center in that. So
Yeah.
Okay.
It's good.
So I'm going to go back to the original answer. We have a clue about Melchizedek.
No idea about Melchizedek. So there you go.
We have ideas.
Yes. So send us more questions. Link is in the description. I don't know what next week holds. So come back. And if there is no question, when I go back and look, then there won't be a next week. But if you send questions in, there will be. So we'll see you then. Hopefully we'll have a question for you. Bye.
Bye.